Hi everyone, I'm Aiden Michaels, and today I'm joined by Edmonton Oilers play-by-play announcer. Though we do share a last name, we are not actually related. It is Jack Michaels. Jack, I appreciate you joining me. I'm glad we could get this interview going. How's the offseason been for you so far?
Well, unexpectedly long. That's certainly, a bit of a drawback to having some extra family time in May. But it's been two lengthy runs, and really three out of the last 4 years. The Oilers have been in the conference final 4 straight years in the final eight. So it's one of those things where I think a reset, and I'd say the same thing about Florida. A reset might be in order for some of the older players on this roster, and a chance to get an extra 6 7 weeks you know of health and recovery time for bodies that have played 50 some odd playoff games over the last 4 years. So I'm trying to take the positives just like the players would.
Now, before we get into the other stuff, of course, we're going to talk about a lot about that in a bit. I want you to take me back to your start in broadcasting. What was your early experience like at Ithaca College? Were you able to call games right away? What was your experience like there?
Well, I was very fortunate at Ithaca. They had tryouts, and I was doing a sports cast. I think the end of my first week freshman year, I was calling games my freshman year. College basketball and field hockey and lacrosse and soccer and a whole bunch of stuff. We had a great broadcasting program back then, and they still do. The people in and around me include Kevin Connors of ESPN and David Muir of ABC World News Tonight and John Meter Perel, the voice of Boston College football and basketball for so many years. So that's just to name a few. Another guy I worked with at college was the voice of the Charlotte Bobcats for a number of years. So, yeah, we had a very deep pool of people, and it was super competitive, and it made you get better to keep up. And as far as doing different sports and having opportunities to, build your tape and build your realm of experience, I can't imagine a better place to go to school.
Yeah, despite you being a hockey fan prior to your first time calling a hockey game, did you find it difficult to pick up a very fast-paced game calling a hockey game?
Well, hockey's definitely different than the other sports. I wouldn't say I found it difficult, but I did find it a new challenge, a new vibe, a new way of, storytelling in very succinct fashion, as opposed to baseball where you could weave things in over the course of an entire half inning or even full inning. Hockey was definitely a different jam in that regard. But I also found I enjoyed it. I found I enjoyed the fact that the game kept you so wrapped up in the action that you were less prone to, you were always kind of on point, and it kept you fully engaged and fully concentrated. And obviously, the game itself, with the hitting and the speed at which it's played, is unlike any other, other than auto racing, where non human elements come into play. So I absolutely did enjoy hockey from the outset, and as a result, as I got a little bit into the teeth of my professional career coming out of Western Pennsylvania, I began to realize that fewer and fewer people did hockey as opposed to the other sports, because, in no small part, of the challenge that it presents.
Now, I read that you described calling that Penguins Cup game back in 1999 as a turning point in your career. Can you tell me that story about how that game unfolded and what came from it?
Well, in Pennsylvania at the time, and I don't know whether they still do this, but at the time, in Pennsylvania, the state high school championship, the teams funneled through, and it turned out where there'd be a West final. Western side of Pennsylvania is the Pittsburgh side, and the eastern side of Pennsylvania is the Philadelphia side. And when you got to the West final and the East final, what they used to do is play those games at 2 o'clock, and then the Penguins on their home ice and the Flyers on their home ice in Philadelphia would play at 7 o'clock. and it was usually a Saturday. So it was a Saturday, and the game that I was doing on the western side of the state went triple overtime. And as a result, the Penguins announcers were kind of hovering around me, like, getting ready to set up and get engaged. And I think, as I remember, there was talk. I mean, and this would never happen today. There was talk of, sliding the face-off back to 7:30 if needed. Even though high school overtime, periods and overtimes were 15 minutes. Uh, and so when the game ended, and it did end in time for the Penguins to play at 7 o'clock as they were scheduled to, but I had the Penguins announcer at the time. The radio guy was Matt McConnell. The TV guy was Mike Lang, who eventually went back to radio, and I got to work as a colleague with Mike for a decade plus. But Matt McConnell, who's now the voice of the Utah Mammoth and has had a number of broadcasting jobs in and around the National Hockey League for the last 3 decades, he came up and kind of asked the question you did, well, what are you doing now? And, oh, all right, is that your thing? Football, basketball, baseball? Because those were the first things out of my mouth. And I said, well, no, not necessarily. I'm just, that's where the bulk of my work is. And I'm doing some high school hockey on the side, but the rest of my work is at the collegiate level. And he said, well, if I were you, I'd explore hockey, because from what I heard, you can call a hockey game, and there's far fewer of those guys around than there are that can call the other sports. And I kind of took him at his word. And a couple months later, I was driving west to Colorado Springs for my first job in pro hockey. So it was absolutely a turning point. That would have been probably somewhere in early April of 1999. And, by September of that year, I was calling preseason games in the minors and starting to build a resume.
Yeah, so with that, and after spending some time in Colorado Springs, as you said, and then a few years later in Anchorage, not only did you do play-by-play, but you also took over some of the other duties with them and being a big help in sort of revitalizing the franchise in a way. Talk to me a bit about that whole experience and all the work you put in with the Aces, aside from just calling the games.
Well, in minor pro hockey, you have a you have a job title, and then it's that really doesn't encompass anything. I mean, it's mine. I think I came up with something like vice president of operations, because I kept kind of evolving the title as my duties expanded. But really, I mean, you're all the same. You're all pitching in to just keep the team afloat financially. I mean, that's what minor pro hockey is all about, is staying in business. And you do what you have to. And in my case, it was everything from putting up dasherboards to selling sponsorships worth a couple $100,000. I was working with the beer companies, I was working with dealerships, I was working with funeral homes, and I mean all kinds of stuff. And it was really a way for me not only to put some extra money in my pocket and keep the team financially viable. But it was also a way to connect with the community, because all of a sudden you're dealing and working with very closely, 50 or 60 small business owners. And those business owners are, of course, reinvesting in the city of Anchorage, and all of a sudden you're starting to know how a city works, as well as how a hockey team works. So it really kind of opened my eyes and widened the breadth of my awareness in terms of the greater financial world, not just my little hockey team that averaged 5,200 fans a game. So it was a great experience. I mean, while you're going through it, and I spent 11 years in the minor leagues, you're wondering whether the National Hockey League opportunity would ever come. But on the other side of it, I can't tell you how much of a better announcer, better person, just better human being in terms of more well-rounded and understanding how the world really works, for going through those experiences. I really wouldn't trade any of it. It was a great time in my life, and I was lucky enough to be in a city that supported the hockey team to an extent where I I lived comfortably with a wife and two young kids. I did not have to struggle and live paycheck to paycheck. A lot of my brethren in the minor hockey leagues had it much tougher than I did. I'll put it to you that way. Sorry about Flighty. He can't help himself.
So when you make that jump to the NHL, obviously applying to some other NHL gigs, Oilers' job opens up in 2010. What was your thought process and experience like throwing your name in the hat for another NHL franchise with Edmonton?
Well, I had a couple close calls, as you mentioned. I think Florida twice, and the New York Islanders, Columbus. I had some near misses, as we all do in this business. I mean, I would say this for anyone looking to get into the business, be prepared for a lot more rejection than acceptance. I'll put it to you that way. It's a highly competitive field, even back then, and probably even more so now. But when I did apply, it was kind of a last minute decision. I wasn't even It was the only job open in 2010, and I really had no inclination to apply. I assumed they would hire a Canadian. No American had ever done games for a Canadian team in the history of the league, and I knew that, and as a result, was planning on not even applying. And then the old line about you can't win the lottery if you don't play it kind of kicked in at some point. And I was on my way out for a family vacation. And at the last minute, decided to put a quick, reel together. Back then, you put it on a DVD. I put a business card in there. I made sure to spell the appropriate names right as far as to whom I was applying. And sent off the application, and away we went. And I didn't hear back for a month. And at first it was going to be a conference call, then it was, well, let's just bring in. And all of a sudden I'm flying to a place I'd never been before. I had never set foot in the province of Alberta. I had never really been anywhere in Canada except for Victoria, British Columbia, because of the minor pro hockey leagues, and because of Toronto, which was close enough to where I grew up, where I had an occasion to go to Toronto a few times as a kid. But I'd never been to any other part of Canada ever. Niagara Falls, maybe, I mean, which basically is Toronto. So, the process was an extensive one. I met probably five or six of the head honchos of the Oilers at the time. They had never hired for the position before, and I think that played in my favor. They were looking at all comers, and I was one of many. And this time the breaks went my way, and I was able to get the job. And it was ironic because it was the one that I don't want to say tried the least, but it was certainly the one that I did not expect to get. Out of all the others, I thought I had less of a chance at the Oiler job than any other job I ever applied for, really.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, at the time, no American announcers doing Canadian teams, very rare to this day. Did you feel like it was going to work against you during the application process?
Well, I mean, I figured once they brought me in, they were serious, right?
Right.
Certainly when I did that last second, application, and then got on the flight for my family vacation, I didn't think I didn't think I was getting the job. I just thought, okay, if anything, I was just doing it so I didn't feel guilty about not applying.
Mhm.
At that time in my life, I was creeping into my mid 30s, and it still hadn't happened, and you start kind of woe is me, and I'll just I mean, your ambition starts getting chipped away at with all that rejection. But I reminded myself, hey, like, you got to apply for everything, and you got to keep chasing it. And so yeah, I absolutely thought it would work against me, but it just goes to show you how little we all know about the way life's going to work. And sometimes the things you think are slam dunks don't turn out to be that way, and sometimes it goes the other way too, where you think something would never happen. And if you'd told me when I was 25 years old that I'd be living in Canada for, going on 20 years, I would have said you're absolutely nuts. And I don't think I could have picked where Edmonton was on the map uh, until I was, you know, until I was late in the high school. I mean, when I first started watching the Oilers, they might as well have been on Neptune. I mean, I had no idea where the place was. Obviously, I was captivated by the teams they had, with Gretzky and Messier and Curry and Anderson and all these guys that I've, come to know and in some cases regard as friends. But I certainly didn't know anything, about the province, the country. I had very much the Simpsons mentality of America Junior, and I couldn't have been more wrong.
So when you got a chance to then finally call a TV game for the Oilers, was it a struggle at all to move from radio to TV in a league like the NHL, or the obviously the level is so high?
No, I wouldn't say struggle. Again, just another challenge, just another, box I had to check. I did a TV game in 2013 as a substitute for my colleague Kevin Quinn, who had a sore throat. And then in 2017, when the LA Kings were hiring television, they asked for and received permission from Edmonton to talk to them. And so I'd done a TV game there. That was something that didn't end up working out. But obviously, when the Oiler situation came up, I felt I was ready. I had 10 years of radio experience, and I knew my partner Louis DeBrusque really well. We had spent a lot of time together socially, and we'd done the one game back in 2013. That didn't have as much of a factor, but I think when you're friends with somebody, I think it makes, quite frankly, the transition to working with them. I think it comes across as a positive to your viewers because they can tell you're friendly, they can tell you have a history together, and I think it incorporates them into the greater telecast where they feel like they're part of the game and part of the show rather than listening to two people talking at them.
Now, looking at a pretty unique situation that you had during your first full season as the TV play-by-play guy for the Oilers, obviously during the pandemic, what was that experience like calling games in that situation with everything going on? It must have been absolutely crazy.
Well, I was grateful to work, but I hope I never have to work like that again. I mean, that was no fun at all. I mean, the whole vibe of hockey is an in-person experience. I would say hockey and baseball are the two that you really have to be there. If I were, whereas I almost prefer watching football on television. Basketball is probably either way. I mean, they've got a nice in arena experience, but for me, hockey and baseball are the two sports you have to be at to fully grasp and enjoy. And when you don't have the vibe of a real crowd. I mean, they had some noise piped in and things like that to try to simulate real life conditions. But especially in Edmonton, there's no way to recapture the energy that those 18,500 maniacs give you. Trust me, it's a vibe unlike any other in professional sports. And not to mention you lose perspective calling it off the monitors. It's a 3D game. You got to be there. You got to line changes, and because you have personnel constantly moving on the fly, if you're only looking and seeing those changes come on a flat screen in front of you, it's not the same, and you end up guessing on a lot of things. And it was just, again, happy to work, and I can't say like, I hated it. It was still calling hockey, but it was, I mean, 25% of the overall experience, 25% enjoyment. It was a grind. It was, for the first time, my quote unquote job felt like a job.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm curious too. When I was a sophomore and doing some hockey games, we would do our away games from a studio, a radio station. And one time, the stream that we were watching the game on completely cut out, so we had to rely on Twitter updates to try and call the game. Did you ever have not something maybe that extreme, but watching a game off the monitor? Did you ever have any technical difficulties that made it difficult for you to watch the game?
Not so much technical difficulties, but again, the passes, the puck is moving so quickly and at such great distances. Sometimes there'd be off-screen developments that you couldn't see. A fight away from the action, a line change where a certain personnel grouping caught you off guard. I one time had Adam Larson scoring a goal instead of a forward. I mean, just stuff like that where you make mistakes. I mean, Joe Bowen had something terrible happen to him where, the game winning and series winning goal, he didn't have a good view because of the monitor situation. I mean, and that's a Hall of Famer. I mean, it's just all of us. We're challenged with things on a flat screen that just don't capture the all encompassing game that hockey is. And again, hockey, unlike football and basketball and baseball, the personnel changes in time. There's no stoppages, there's no huddles, there's no timeouts, to break up. There's no fouls and stoppages. There's none of that in hockey. It's puck out of play. You'll see who goes onto the ice, but 80% of the time your personnel is changing on the fly, and to try to do that off a flat screen where those changes are coming beyond the breadth of your vision, no one could have enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it's nice. I'll knock on wood that glad those days are behind us now. Obviously one of the weirdest years and seasons in sports that we've ever had. So of course I mentioned before we started being born and raised in Los Angeles, diehard Kings fan. So I'm no stranger to seeing Connor McDavid, especially him destroying the Kings in the playoffs for quite some time now. How special is it to get to call games with one of the best players this game has ever seen?
Well, I mean, it's obviously everything you'd imagine it to be. It's a scenario where every 20 games or so, I got to remind myself, hey, like, other people haven't seen this as often as you have. Don't make it sound like the things he does are routine. I mean, you're always giving yourself reminders like that to appreciate not only his talents, but I mean, Leon Draisaitl is right there with him. I mean, you're seeing two of the game's greatest players, and Colorado has the same deal with McKinnon and McCarr, and Pittsburgh for so many years had Malkin and Crosby, but I feel like McDavid and Draisaitl have separated themselves, and it's just they're two completely different players, and I never get tired of watching the plays they're making. I just have to again remind myself that they are still spectacular, even though they've become routine to me over the years.
Yeah, and do you have a comparison, do you think, of who McDavid is most like back in, let's say, players from the 80s and 90s? It's
No,
right.
no, I
Yeah.
don't. I don't, because he makes plays at a speed that it's never been achieved
Yeah.
before. I don't have a comparison, and I think that's what makes him the player he is. Is he is the most advanced version of a superstar we've ever seen, and I guess I imagine there'll be another guy, but I think what we're seeing with McDavid is, and Connor Bedard has entered and Macklin Celebrini has entered, but they're not at the speed McDavid is. And that's not to take anything away from him. I mean, particularly Macklin Celebrini is a fabulous player. But I think what the sporting world is finding out, as they did with Michael Jordan, is it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while before a guy enters that conversation. That's sacred ground for now, and you're not going to get there. You're not going to get there overnight. I don't think I've seen a guy yet, and we might, like Jordan, it might take the entirety of his career and beyond before we get a guy who deserves to be mentioned in the same sentence, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I fully agree. Now, my last question for you, Jack, here is from a family friend who used to play for the Oilers, and he wanted me to ask you this question to see if you could guess who it is. So I'll ask you. It's basically a three-parter question. So he says, ask him who his favorite newfie, the worst skater, but the best draft beer drinker he's ever met, and he wants to know if you could figure out who that is.
And he's an Oiler
And he used to be an Oiler in the 2010s.
in the 2010s.
Yes.
Oh boy, now I feel totally put on the spot here.
Yeah,
And
and feel free not to answer, don't worry.
and he's from Newfoundland.
Yes.
He's from Newfoundland. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on this?
Ended with some good
Oh my
trivia.
oh my goodness. Oh, I feel mortified and embarrassed.
Oh, donut. I
See,
mean,
it's too early in the morning for a question like this. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead. Geez, a family friend of yours. That should be a clue.
yeah, played
Teddy
some time with
Purcell.
Teddy
Teddy
Purcell.
Purcell.
Teddy
There you
Purcell.
go.
There
Yeah,
you go.
Teddy Purcell. I just had to narrow it down, and Teddy is. I mean, God, he was such a good dude. Teddy Purcell and is such a good dude.
Hmm.
I don't mean to sound like he's passed away. Teddy Purcell is one of those guys that you absolutely need in your locker room. That's the great thing about hockey is as good a player as he was, and just phenomenally skilled, and and but he was an unreal guy. He is the quintessential glue guy in your room, a guy who can play and deserves to be out there, but is absolutely just as important, if not more so, on road trips and getting the guys together. There is not a guy. I'll tell you what, Teddy is on a list of people, and there's probably only three or four of them off the top of my head. Teddy Purcell's on a list of people that I would suspect not one guy in the National Hockey League would tell you I dislike Teddy Purcell.
Hmm.
And considering the passion and the emotion the game is played with, that's fairly rare. But yeah, Teddy was an absolute beauty.
Yeah, he's the best, super funny guy. He obviously says hello and wanted me to ask you
Yeah,
that.
no,
Um,
he's also like the DeSecchi's guy. He's a guy that is on the short list of my most interesting guys in the world. Teddy Purcell would be on that list. Teddy Purcell, Tyson Berry, like just guys that everyone gravitates around, and Teddy's a great guy. So yes, please, the next time you talk to him, tell him it was a little early in the morning and I stumbled around for a second, but I eventually came up with it, and he was absolutely God, a fantastic guy to be around. I wish his career had gone, 2 or 3 more years, so he could have been, truly part of Edmonton's full revival, because he would have been a valuable asset for that team, both on and off the ice. Great guy. Tell him I said hello.
Absolutely will do, Jack. Thank you for doing this. I'm glad we could find a time to do the interview, and best of luck to you and the Oilers next season.
You bet, Aiden. Take care.
All righty. Thanks everyone for watching. I'm Aiden Michaels. This was Jack Michaels. We'll see you next time.